July 26th is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act, something you probably don't think about unless you meet someone like my next guest. Just before going off to college to play football, a fist fight left him a quadriplegic. Fast forward 15 years later, a car accident caused a second spinal injury. Today, he has a doctorate of education, is a faculty member at FSU College of Business, and serves on the Delta Airlines Disability Advisory Board. He is a 2-time U.S. presidential appointee and a 7-time Florida Gobierno appointee, helping shape national, state, and community public policy. Today he's going to share his story, the impact of the ADA on things like quality of life and travel, and how we can better connect with people with disabilities. Community changemaker, world traveler, daredevil, J.R. Harding. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you, and happy Monday to you. It's a privilege to be here and to be a part of your show.
Well, thank you.
A friend of mine once said, there are no strangers in the world, only friends who have not yet met. And so I'd like to give a shout out to all of your listeners and the new friends that I might have now connected with.
Well, thank you. That's really what the show's all about, is being curious about the people around you, asking questions, leading with that mentality of curiosity instead of fear, judgment, or dismissiveness. So take us back to that first accident, 1983. You got into a fist fight?
Yes, boys are boys. And we horseplay, we do dumb things. Sometimes we need to get out there and solve differences of opinion the wrong way. And my senior year, I tried to do the right thing and grow up a little bit and not resolve issues with fists. And as I turned and walked away, I was grabbed from behind and thrown down to start a fist fight. And at 6'5" and about 220 pounds, just the weight and the angle, everything was perfect, and the spinal cord snapped. Just like that. In a blink of an eye, life changed, and I knew it instantly that I was paralyzed.
You said in one of your speeches I think you were talking to the Boy Scouts of America, that because of your Boy Scout training, you were aware immediately of what was happening. Is that true?
Absolutely. Because I went to get up and I couldn't. And at the same time, my brain kept saying, my legs are in the air, my legs are in the air. And that's where the brain had remembered the last place with my body in that upward, downward trajectory. And I tried to say to the boys, my fellow football players, sadly, that I had a spinal cord injury. And of course, they didn't believe me. It's get up, you sissy kind of approach. And they stood me up against all of those rules. And my legs went out from under me. And then, of course, they knew right then and there this was serious. This was not what was meant to happen. And all of our lives changed from that moment on.
You describe in your book kind of the state of mind that you had during that first accident. I'm reading your book, What Now, which is such a great insight into you wrote it so well. I love that I can feel like I'm hearing the thoughts of your teenage self. But what was interesting is you're so logical when the accident happened, but then when you're in rehab, you kept telling yourself, no, this is temporary. This is so temporary. So what was the moment where you finally realized it wasn't?
Probably a year or two out, really, that delayed. But I have to go back and give my wife credit of her coaching in the book and her voice and her guidance. And it was a team project, and that's important. And she made it a much better piece. And part of that courage from her and others, I was in a place to share those deep thoughts. So returning to your question, when did it eventually register? Early college, late first year, early second year, where I was sick and tired of being on the sidelines of life. And that was the imposed sense of handicapness as a result of the disability, right? I wasn't being called to play out on the field. I had to watch my friends, right? And I wasn't one of them, meaning I wasn't a person with a disability. And it wasn't until I really realized that this is an equal opportunity issue. And even though I may need assistance getting dressed, taking a shower, going to the bathroom, using a mobility device to get from point A to point B, doesn't remove my passions, my interests, my ability to contribute, my ability to love, be loved, and have a voice. Right. And so it took a while, and I don't know if there was that exact moment. It was more of an evolution, and we all deal with grief and tragedy and challenges differently. But I can say that once I made that leap, right, and recognized my fellow brethren with disabilities, that I was like them, I was one of them, I am part of them. The knowledge I learned from them, from those who had been there solving problems every single day for years, that light switch really went off. And it was truly amazing of how much more I was able to absorb and how much more I could take on of making peace with oneself.
So it's almost like once you accepted the truth of that, your status, and realized that you were a part of that community, that you were able to make huge leaps in your mindset and in your progress in all areas.
Absolutely. But I will say some of the denial, or let's say as a boy or as anyone, male or female, we get stitches, we break arms, we rehab our knees, right? There is that recovery sense. And so part of that denial and that inner fight with me was very important to learn how to pick up a cup again, okay? To be able to have self-feed, to brush my teeth, right? To move my wheelchair. Those were monumental steps of independence that allowed you to open that next door, to make it a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger.
And that's really what the heart of the Americans with Disabilities Act is about, is being able to find those little things that ground you as a person who's a part of the world.
Well, and that was transformative as I came to your part of the world there in Pensacola, is the Americans with Disabilities Act had just passed, giving 51 million Americans rights. Actually, the dignity of being a person and the responsibilities that come with being an adult, right? Of getting a job, going to school, or getting around, taking care of your business, and not having excuses for not participating in life. And ultimately, that's what it was about. And so those thousands of other advocates, much more senior to me, had put the pieces together, learning from women, the voting rights, persons of color, and others in the civil rights movement that made the 70s and 80s and then ultimately 1990 in the Americans with Disabilities Act.
There's a lot of listeners, I think, that don't have anybody in their life who uses a wheelchair and may not be aware of the importance of the ADA and what it, we'll say, motivates businesses and cities and, the Department of Roads and all that to comply with. So can you give me a couple of examples of what life as a young person was prior to the ADA being passed?
Absolutely. It was a life of relegated differences, of inequality, of using the back door, of having to be bounced upstairs, of not being able to um, rent a hotel room, not being able to use public transportation.
Now, explain the hotel room, because that's something I think a lot of, for those of you who don't know listening, my brother has cerebral palsy, so he uses a wheelchair. So I have lots of firsthand experience of this sort of thing. So, but for those who don't, explain the hotel part, because people think, what's the big deal? You have a bottom floor room.
Well, I think of back in in those early days, right, going on spring break with my friends and going down to Daytona Beach or down to Key West. You know what? My friends had to pick me up off the bed and carry me, my 6'5" frame, through the bathroom door and set me in the bathtub, right? Because the door wasn't wide enough, right? We could get my wheelchair through the front door of the hotel room if we changed the hinges. But the frame on the bathroom door, there were no hinges to change because those doors are more narrow. And most people can appreciate that in the little half bathroom in their house, how narrow that space is. Well, that's what the world was like. And so it wasn't until really late 1990s, with the triggering of a number of lawsuits and stuff, that hotels and restaurants, gas stations, and on really began to take the ADA seriously and think of it not so much as a compliance issue, because it's just a minimum standard. And people need to remember that, a minimum standard. As opposed to an economic opportunity and a chance to unite and bring families together. So you and your brother could go travel together and rent 2 rooms from the property, not 1 room from that property. And so that's been a big piece and something we need to continue to advance, because the minimum standard of hotel rooms for mobility impaired is only 3%. And of the 3%, only 1% has a roll-in shower. So any of those given hotels we see all over the place, right, with 100 rooms, only one of them has a roll-in shower. That's it.
Yeah, and that's the problem. You said when we were chatting last week that universal design, minimum standards versus universal design, and what is good for us being people with disability is good for everyone. So why not make it for everyone? There were some other examples of travel accommodations that I would love for you to share, because my brother, for example, he loves to travel. So he has hilarious stories of boarding and exiting planes and all kinds of stuff. So tell us what kind of standards and not rules, but minimum requirements are being followed by the airline, since you are on the Delta Advisory Board.
Well, thank you. Well, and airplanes are different than hotels. Right? Remember, this is a piece of metal at 30,000 feet in the air, flying at 600 miles an hour. The rules are a little different, and that falls under the Air Carriers Act, which is different than the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh.
Now, the same equal opportunity, non-discriminatory practices exist, okay, but the rules are different. And they're a little earlier than the Americans with Disabilities Act. 1986, the Air Carriers Act started. But essentially, they're to not damage your mobility equipment, right? Treat you fairly, have an emergency evacuation chair on board. If your wheelchair can fold, it can fit in the closet remember where the flight attendants or all the first class people put all of their stuff right there at the door? Well, actually, that space is reserved for your onboard wheelchair. So you can actually bring it on the plane and stick it in there. Or they have to do training, and they have what's called CROs, civil rights officers for all airlines. So if you are a person with a disability in flying, and for some reason you feel you're having challenges, or people not understanding some reasonable accommodations you require, you can always ask for a CRO to come mitigate and run interference, and they have the authority empowered in them to do the right thing that's still safe and appropriate.
And there's some etiquette around people with wheelchairs that I think I would love for you to share. I am aware of some of it, but maybe some of it has changed. Because the reason that I bring that up is I want people to be curious about other people, no matter what their ability is. And if I don't want them to see someone who is in a wheelchair and think, well, I would love to talk to them, but it might get awkward, or maybe maybe they would be awkward. But how can we help those interactions be more meaningful and help people connect regardless of ability?
Well, I teach this a little bit in my class. And the question is, well, how do you make friends? You know, you go up and you talk to people. That's it. There's no special medicine here. You know, you think someone's cute. You think they're interesting. You feel their wheelchair is tricked out. Right? Maybe you see there's actually a problem, someone being mistreated. We treat people like people. There's no special language or code here. Yes, you don't want to use the word retarded. You don't want to be patronizing. You don't want to say, oh, it's so good to see you out. Right? Come on now. Right? I'm not the family pet and was allowed to come outside today. But those kinds of things are real, because going back to prior to the ADA, okay, I remember very clearly moms and dads snatching their children away when you were at the mall, and don't stare, that's not polite. But you know what? Kids at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those are the most real, most authentic, come right up to you. What's wrong with you? Okay, you're right. I am different. Thank you for asking. Let me explain it. Let me tell you why my legs don't work.
What's your explanation to a 4-year-old?
To a 4-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Just, it would have to be real and in the moment and how they ask me, but I would probably simply say that my legs don't work like yours, and that the phone cord was broken and they don't know how to fix it.
That's a good explanation, the phone cord, the communication, which makes me realize that we got into some other stuff, and I would love for people to know about your second spinal cord accident and kind of the process. You know, take us from like what was happening right prior to that, because it was significant. It was a major milestone, and then the accident, and then life after that second accident. A cruel Groundhog's Day, as you said in your book.
Yes, indeed. There's a famous movie with Bill Murray there. Just can't get out of it. Well, it may be shocking to the audience, but I had forgotten I was a quadriplegic. I was just JR again, okay? I was completing my doctorate at Florida State. I was up to chapters 4 and 5. So I was like being on third base, heading to home plate. I was what was called a regent, and that meant I was one of 15 running our universities, like the University of West Florida. So I get to hire and fire university presidents and determine whether or not UWF got a football team. Those were some of the pieces. I was helping candidate Jeb Bush at the time run for governor for the state of Florida. And then my brother was marrying his long-term girlfriend in Sweden. And I was rushing back to Florida State, having taken a 2-week break to go finish this document, this book I was writing. And so I could take my place in the world, because as a person with a significant disability, needed to be more qualified to be considered for the entry-level job, as opposed to, just being qualified. And I was driving home from Orlando by myself, listening to some good rock and roll on the radio, and kind of went from the turnpike to I-75 and hit the fuzz. And this was before satellite radio and song search. So I leaned over and was hitting the radio button and slowly drifting across the freeway. And I knew what I was doing. I was like, well, one more button, I'll get to that station. And as I hit it, I hit the drunk bumps, the dit-dit-dits, to tell you to come over. And the dit-dit-dit shook the vehicle so violently, it created a muscle spasm, and I ended up turning my adaptive steering column at 75 miles an hour. And I ended up rolling the vehicle not once, but 4 times, and 2 broken legs, broken shoulder, and the second spinal cord. But again, I don't know where this fight or tenacity comes from, but as the EMTs were picking me up and they took me to one of those little medical places there in Wildwood that was not able to handle the trauma, there I am advocating, fighting, which hospital am I going to go to? Why am I going to go there? And being in charge and making decisions that affected my life. Right. And not taking no as the right response. Look, guys, this is about me, and we're going to get me where I need to be. And so I'm grateful that the University of Florida was able to put me back together.
Yeah. Well, we're all grateful that you were also put back together, because your book is amazing, and it's such an important thing to have somebody who's a part of that community in trying to make positive and meaningful legislation, right? Because you've got legislation in one hand and attitudes in the other of people. So to be able to work with both as a person with firsthand experience, it's really valuable, and we're all glad that you're here. You wanted to share, I think you said 4 A's of connecting with people with disabilities. So lay it on us. How can we connect?
Right. Well, it's called the right attitude, and we've talked a lot about that. Access. Let's exceed those minimum standards. Let's accommodate folks. Right? And finally, let's assimilate everybody into the team, into the family, into our community, state, and country. So the 4 A's, right? Attitude, access, accommodation, and assimilate. We can make a difference with abilities, not with disabilities.
I love that. That is so good. Thank you so much. If people want to read your book, follow you, your work, how can they do that online?
I would love to hear from anyone. jrharding.com. We'll get you to the right direction. www.jrharding.com.
That's so
Thank
perfect.
you so much, Meredith.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this or you're listening to it and it meant something to you, do me a favor and share it with one person. And the clickable links to JR's books and his website will all be in the notes, which will come out via email. You can text REAL to 66866 to get in on that. Thank you so much again, JR. I appreciate you coming. That's a wrap. You did awesome.